All right, friends. Well, welcome back to Mike's podcast. It is good to have you all with us. I'm hanging out in my bunker here, and we're going to take a little break from walking through Job to talk to my friend Luke Norsworthy. How's it going, Luke?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. I feel like in some ways, like talking to me is like the book of Job, incarnate.
Is it that? Why is that? What has your life been like that has made you the Book of Job?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like I prefer to function as like the idiot friends who like to give too much advice when they should really just shut up. I mean, that's what I like to do, and I hope to do that during this next 3 hours on the podcast.
Good. Yeah, I'm set up for 3 hours. You even identifying with the friends of Job is interesting because I immediately went to just assuming that you saw yourself as Job as the main character.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like to see myself as the center of every story and the hero of every arc. But I'm going to make an exception because I'm with you, and I know, in comparison to you, I am at best a supporting actor in the great story that is Mike.
Oh yeah, there you go. There you go. So you are the second guest on Mike's podcast, so you should feel really, really honored. Because my first guest was my son Isaac, because
Mm,
we needed to talk about his quarantine stash.
yeah, that's I.
And
I had one until yesterday morning. I trimmed mine off.
why'd
Let
you
me ask you.
trim?
Let's talk about Isaac first, then we'll talk about the
Okay.
stash. I mean, this is your podcast, but I'm
No,
just
no,
going
no.
to be
You
rude.
go. You're a
Do
pro at
when
this.
when you name your son Isaac, are you thinking there's a chance I might have to sacrifice him?
How many times have you used that?
Never.
No?
I've never used that joke
That's
before. I would like
quick.
to.
Well
Yeah.
done. Well
I've got some
done.
Jacob material that I like to use about, your name's Jacob means you're deceiver. Don't blame me. I'm not the one who named you that. Like I like to use that joke, but
That's
Isaac,
good.
no, it's fresh
Yeah.
material.
My nephew is named Jacob, and I'm pretty sure that my brother doesn't listen to this, so we can talk about the fact that he named his first son Jacob. And yeah.
Yeah, that's just rough. So Isaac, you've never thought about sacrificing him.
I mean, early on, there's a few days that were pretty rough, but he's turned into a good kid now.
Yeah, that's good.
It's gotten
And
better.
how is his stash?
His stash is coming along. I mean, it's kind of like creepy wannabe porn star stash is
Hmm.
about where it's at. And he's
And
got
that's
about 3 hairs coming out of his chin that he refuses to mess with also.
Wow. Well, you're kind of I don't know. I'm not blaming you, but what I'm saying is that you set a high bar for facial hair because you've got a robust beard that probably is creating some sort of inferiority complex in your son because he's trying to live up to what you are. And I don't know. I'm not trying to tell you how to parent, but I feel like like it's a lot of pressure to live up to what you are
Well done. So let's get back to why'd you shave your stash?
because it doesn't look like yours. It it looks uh it is a little bit ruddy in its complexion, and so it is, yeah, I don't know. I shaved everything off, the beard and all that was ready to go, and took a video Sunday morning with my daughter, my youngest daughter. I was like, "Hey, should I keep this or not?" And she's like, "Yeah, you look great." And I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna walk out the door." And then I looked at myself and I was like, "Man, I there was one time in homiletics class when I was in school, and I accidentally used the word chick in a sermon, and my professor, a guy named Randy Harris, yelled at me and said, "How dare you defame the word of God by being unprepared?" So, which was my excuse for using the word chick. And I just heard his voice, "How dare you defame the word of God with that mustache?"
Oh, I like it. Well, we're a few minutes into this, and let's like talk about why we're talking to you, because otherwise people are checking out because they don't want to hear about our facial
Th-
hair.
They
Like
should.
they shouldn't. So you have a book that is being released. Like I'm going to try and get this podcast out pretty quick, and
Hmm,
it will be either being released tomorrow or today, depending on how quick we can get this
okay,
thing out.
deal.
And I wanted to get to talk to you because I actually like, believe it or not, I actually really respect you. I think that you're really thoughtful and smart. And even though you have a crappy sense of humor, you have
Oh,
interesting things to say,
wow.
I think.
That's a turd sandwich. Like, there was some nice stuff there, and then right in the middle,
Right in the middle.
you just dropped that one about my sense of humor, which,
Right.
honestly, if I could switch everything and you said you have terrible things to say, but you're really funny, I would probably be more happy. But whatever.
um, So, Luke, you and I, we met each other on a trip. Maybe it's been like a couple of years now, 2 years, maybe something, year and a half,
That
something
sounds about
ago.
right. That sounds
We
about right.
we were over in Israel and Palestine, and we were there with a group called Telos, doing incredible peacemaking work there. And while we were there, we got to know each other a bit. And you had just released your first book, God Over Good,
I did.
and during that trip pestered me the whole time to buy and read your book, which I felt guilted into. And so about halfway through the trip, I downloaded it on my Kindle and started reading it while we were in the Holy Land together.
Yeah. Which
Um,
is fitting because when you read the book, it feels like you're on holy ground.
it felt like I was on holy ground.
Mhm.
And I actually really did appreciate a lot of what you had to bring in that book. And I'm really looking forward to people getting into this next book. So your new book is called Befriending Your Monsters. And tell us a little bit about like what's the premise behind what you're
Mhm.
writing on in this book.
Well, we all know monsters are fake. The idea of like a Godzilla or, some werewolf popping out of your forest to come get you, like we all know those are fake. But those fake monsters can often put the fur, flesh, and skin upon the very real fears that each and every one of us have. The word monster in Latin, the Latin word from which we get monsters literally is the word warn. And so all along monsters, these fake monsters have been warnings. And I think if we learn how to listen to what God can use through these fears that we all have, is that they're warnings for something much deeper that's subterranean that we typically want to run away from and hide from. But my argument in the book is that if you learn how to befriend those are the very things that God can use to take you into the dark so that you can experience the light.
Yeah, I like that. You've got a good pitch down. Well done on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a book. It's like you've been working on this for a long time,
How
and
long, I mean, before we get into some of the content of it, can I ask how long had this been like brewing in you? Like how long was the process of getting this out of you?
I sent a copy to a mutual friend of ours, Sean Palmer. You know Sean, right?
Yep, I know Sean.
So Sean sent me a text and goes, "I think you sent me a rough draft of this in 2014."
Huh.
And I was like, wow, that you remember from 2014 when I was writing is impressive. But yeah, it literally has been that long. I mean, the idea popped up before my first book, and first book was like, well, maybe I go to this monster stuff, and I thought, no, I've got these faith issues that are really I wouldn't say yeah, they were crippling. My faith was faltering, and so I had to write this first book because it was what I had to deal with. I think all good writing comes out of conflict. Hemingway said that like good art or good book is the human heart in conflict with itself. And so like I've had this monster stuff in the back burner for a long time. I had to write the first book, and then this is the book that I had to write after. But
Okay.
man, I think the thing about what we do, and as a pastor, you spent years preaching, where those seem like you preach them and they're done, and then you just kind of move on. This is one of those ideas that no pun intended, haunted me for a long time. Of like what's really lurking below the surface, and so it's been there for a long time.
Yeah, it just kinda nags at you. I do think, like, I love the idea that there are these things that are behind the thing that we're often ignoring, and you talk about 3 different, like, things behind the things or 3 different fears of
Yep,
comparison and more and success,
yep,
right?
true.
Um, can you just give me a little, like, summary of, like, what is the fear of comparison? What does that do to you?
Yeah, I get all those from not just my lived experience, but Henry Nouwen said something that really concretized kind of these feelings that I was going through when he said that the three lies that we're all tempted to believe is I am what I have, I am what others say about me, and I am what I do.
Yeah.
And so those three lies became kind of the architecture underneath the monster metaphor. And so the monster of more is, I am what I have. The monster of success is I am what I do. And the monster of comparison is I am what others say about me. And comparison is like this idea that which is so natural. Like every one of us naturally needs something to help us navigate this perplexing thing of life. Because how do you really answer the question of how am I doing? Like when your son Isaac is trying to not get sacrificed by you, he has this nascent beard that's appearing on his face, and he's going, you know what? I don't know if this is good or not. How does Isaac now?
He's 14. Or no,
He's
he
four.
just turned 15.
Okay, so both of us don't know how old he is,
It's true.
but he's 14 or 15, and so to figure out how good his mustache is for a 14, 15-year-old boy, what is he gonna do? He's gonna look at other 14 or 15-year-old boys, because if he looks at his dad, he's gonna hate himself. He can't live up to you right now. But what he does is he compares himself to the people around him, because answering the question, "How's your facial hair doing?" is hard to answer on its own. In the same way, the more substantial things of life, they're hard to gauge. Like for me and you probably, when I started preaching, it was hard for me to determine how I'm doing as a
Yeah.
preacher. And so for me, the easiest thing to do is look at the person in front of me, like look at the person next to me. And when I started preaching, I preached at this little country church for 3 years. And then I started preaching at this large interdenominational Bible study in West Texas, in Abilene, Texas. And the guy before me was this 6'5" Baptist guy who left to pastor a small Baptist church in Highland Village, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. And this guy made a huge impact in my life. I love the work that he did. And so I just said, okay, I'm going to replace him at this Bible study. I'm going to follow him. And so what he's doing, I feel like I need to be doing. The problem was that guy turned out to be Matt Chandler. And that small Baptist church in Highland Village, Texas is now the Village, which is a church of that went from like 300 people or 100 people to, 15,000
Thousands.
or
Yeah.
yeah. So, I unwisely hitched my wagon to a horse that is much faster than I'll ever be.
Yeah, do you think that there's ever a point, like, how do you know, like, let's just keep going with preaching, and people obviously aren't all preachers and they've got their own sort of thing, but how do you know if I'm not comparing myself to another preacher, how do I know if I'm doing a good job preaching?
Yeah, well, here's the thing about the monsters is that the thing that you look at is rarely what it's really about. And so I think comparison for me, comparison was a guy named Matt Chandler, and he was really the prop in the story.
Okay.
It's something about him personally. It has nothing to do with who he is or his character. I think nothing but the best of him. But the prop has this thing that pulls us. It pulls me away from who God wants me to be. It pulls me away from my truest self. And so the way it pulled me is like I felt like I had to be him. But if you move past the prop and the pull, there's actually a point that's underneath all that. And I think the point for comparison is to say that this sliding scale of comparison, which comparison is always a sliding scale, because you look down at one person and you look up to the next person, and it leaves you with this sort of like sense of like being off balance because you're comparing yourself to something that's not stationary, it's not established. And so I think underneath the pull of pulling you away from who God wants you to be by trying to make you be a poor version of someone else, the point of comparison is it says you need to hop off this sliding scale and find something that's established and secure that you find your identity in. And so every time I look to someone else to say, Luke, you're doing good and I'm well pleased in you, it's a reminder that the point of comparison is to stop and hear that still quiet voice that says, Luke, you are my beloved with whom I'm well pleased.
Yeah. How, like, at what point for you did you start to realize, like, this is eating at my life in this kind of way, where you could get to the point where you could look back and you could see the pattern in your own story, where you could look back and say, like, oh, I've hitched my wagon to comparing myself to Matt Chandler, and here's how it's sort of playing itself out. How did you get to this point of being able to be self-reflective enough to notice that, to own it, to sort of start seeing it play, how it was playing itself out in your life?
Yeah, early on, I figured out like this is not working.
Yeah. It just
It was like,
felt wrong, or, like, what
well, no,
was
like well, I couldn't live up to him. Like I wasn't as
sure.
good as him. Like just to be quite frank, like he's just more talented. I mean, I think he's one of the two most gifted communicators I've ever been around in my life.
I'm
And
the other?
quickly, yes, you
Okay.
and Matt Chandler. That's what
Me
I
and
was going
Matt
to say.
Chandler.
I didn't want to like boost your ego too much. I
I
already
got
said
it.
your beard was great. Didn't want to, I feel like it's putting too much pressure on you to say that, but it's true. And early on, like I realized the feedback from everyone was like, "We miss Matt. We miss Matt. We miss
Yeah?
Matt." And so early, on, I was like, "Oh, this is not going to work for me." Now, I didn't have. I'm 21 years old at the time. Like I didn't have the foundation or the maturity to understand really what was happening. And I would say it took much longer for me to become okay with not having to be as good or better or worse or whatever than someone else. It took years from that, and it took this slow, steady, quiet process of spiritual formation to kind of let me figure out how to root myself in something more substantial than how I stack up to someone else. So
Yeah.
there wasn't like one moment where all of a sudden it clicked. Like there were
Sure.
plenty of little moments where it clicked that oh, you aren't him, but uh, it took this long process, and I think that's a process of spiritual formation. Is that you show up and do these practices, and you're not going to notice it immediately, but over time, you're eventually going to become a different person.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wanna poke a little bit into, like, those practices and what they are before I get there. I kind of wanted to hang out in comparison because I was curious how you handle and respond to things now. I was for so I'd started this podcast and I'd asked people to put some reviews on iTunes, and I went and looked it up, and then like your podcast showed up as one of the. By the way, Luke does a great podcast, Newsworthy with Norsworthy, and interviews some fantastic people, very very popular. You should all listen to it and download it. So yours showed up as like you and Joel Osteen showed up as like related
Fitting
podcasts that you should listen to.
fitting pair. Yep,
Yeah.
that's us.
So I click on yours, and you've got a ton more reviews, and I was just reading through a few of them, and one of the ones that pops up on the top essentially says like Luke has these fantastic guests on, and but his humor is so off-putting that I have a hard time listening to it. Just stop trying to be funny, Luke, or something like that.
Mm,
And
yeah.
the whole thing. And so like this thing rose up in me where I wanted to like write the guy a note, and I wanted to say like I think actually Luke's personality is a part of the reason that he's able to get these guests, and if he didn't like maybe they wouldn't like connect with him in the way that they do, and you don't get to talk to these people, and maybe the reason you don't get to talk to them is because you don't have that kind of sense of humor. And like I had this like thing where like I just wanted to be like, hey jackass, let me tell you what I my podcast, I get to cuss if I want to.
Yeah,
So, when you so in the role that you're in, both in ministry where you're preaching, where you're traveling around preaching, where you're putting out a podcast that all kinds of people are listening to, you get a ton of critique, a ton of comparison, a ton of like, here's who I think you should be, and you're not that person. How before we get into like the spiritual practices that have been helpful for you in forming this stuff, like what do you do with that stuff now being in a healthier place than maybe when you're
yeah.
21?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say thanks for being a good friend, and, if someone left a comment like that on your podcast, I'd feel the same way, and that's just like what friends do, like, you just get each other's back, but if it was the criticism about you, you'd respond differently. You would the journey you've been on to become who you are has enabled you to withstand those sort of criticisms, because I know you've gotten obviously the shape and the form of them are different, but you've gotten the same criticisms, like where people just they don't connect to you. That's part of
Sure.
life. Um, and so early on, Matt Chandler's a guy I compare myself to, and the friend who wrote the foreword of this book is Annie F. Downs, who has a podcast that is exponentially larger than mine, and we become friends. I didn't really know who she was. We met in real life, and then like she became part of our family to some degree, and like we like our kids love her, and uh, then I realized, oh my goodness, like this is a person who's like had substantial success in every facet of work that I really care about doing, and it's better than mine. Like
Hmm.
she's a speaker that connects to people in ways that I don't feel like I do. The podcast downloads, the book sales, all that stuff is better than any sort of like concrete, objectable stat about my work.
Yeah.
And now it's just like, but I can celebrate who she is. Like I know I have a different voice in a different lane. I'm doing different things than her, and I'm okay with it. And so I can celebrate and cherish her success. And honestly, like the comparison I felt about Matt, I've never felt about Annie. Like it literally just hasn't been there. And it's not because, oh my gosh, I'm such a great person. Like there are plenty of things that are awful about me. Mike, you can just add those on after the podcast ends. But I feel like it's just like this subtle, slow work of God that I have tried to let myself listen more to what God says about me than even what I say about myself or others say about me. And so it gives you that solid foundation so that when the world around you is wobbly, you still have stability. I,
Yeah.
M- Mike, I don't
No,
know if you
go
take
ahead.
much yoga. You ever taken a yoga class, Mike?
I've never taken a yoga class because
Mm.
I'm not a 32-year-old woman.
Okay. Well, I feel like that's
that
real
I'm getting
ageist right there.
that's super ageist, super sexist, and I'm gonna get a ton of crap for that.
You
But
should. You
but
should get
you've
crap
just
for that.
taught me that I don't care.
You don't care. You don't need to care. Well, I took a class a couple years ago, and I was trying to like do this like one leg balancing thing, and it was not working out for me. And the instructor, Suzanne, walks over to me and she goes, "Luke, find your dreesty." And I was like, "My what? Like that sounds like a drink or something that you get with a umbrella in it, which sounds great." But I was like, What are you talking about?" She goes, find a spot on the ground or on the wall and just look at that." And when before I was kind of wobbling around because I was looking at myself, trying to get my feet right and looking at where my hands were and where my hips were and all that. She says, find a stable spot that's not going to move. It's not going to wobble. It's not going to, falter. it's stable. And once you find that stable spot, the entirety of your body can kind of use that as a foundation. So no matter what happens to your body, you still have something stable to look at. And I think that's what, if you want to call it quiet time, if you want to talk about spiritual disciplines or, contemplation, whatever you want to use the terminology for, it has to be that stable spot that kind of
Yeah.
roots you and grounds you so that people's perspective of you, people's affirmation of you, people's disrespect of you, like those things are going to move around. That's just life. But yet that's something that's stable.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my experience has been that what the disciplines do in my life is start to make one of the outcomes of it is that the reactions that I want to have start to over time become natural and normal. And so like what you're describing
Yeah.
with
Yeah. Yeah.
Annie is like you didn't have to consciously try to not compare yourself. It just is the reality of who you've become. And so who you've become
That's
is
good.
just naturally pouring out of you that it's like I use the analogy when I was in high school, I played baseball.
Mhm.
And my senior year, I was having a terrible like slump where I was just grounding out all the time. And so I go to this batting coach and he ties one of my hands behind my back because I
Okay.
was like, when you're hitting, you want to pull with one hand. You're pulling through with one hand. Anyways, I was pushing with one hand. And so I was making my back go flat and he ties my hand behind my back and he makes me swing with one hand. So I was practicing pulling, 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 pulling. And his whole thing was he's like, I want you to do this before every single game because what you're doing is you're training your arm to pull and your other arm to not push. And you obviously, when you get in the game, you're not going to use that. You're not going to swing one handed, but you're going to have trained yourself in a way where it's just going to become natural when you're up there and you have to react in the moment that you're going to react in the way that you're trained your body to react.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like that's what
That's
spiritual
good.
disciplines start to do for you.
Yeah, like you don't think about having to. I'm not a baseball guy. I don't fully get the terminology here, but you don't have to think about that because it's become muscle memory. Like
It's become
you
muscle
just
memory. Yeah.
you just do it now, like because you put
Right.
yourself in like that swing. And I think it's exactly right. Like you don't think, oh, I shouldn't let Annie's success determine how I feel about my own performance. Like it just happens.
Right. So for you, in your sort of journey, and I know different things, my experience has been different spiritual disciplines are helpful for me at different times and have been
True.
helpful in different parts of my journey. And they're just simply a tool that moves me towards who God has designed and created me to be, that moves me towards fruits of the
Yep.
spirit, towards that sort of stuff, right? And so like when I get too locked into a tool, that tool starts to become a
Hmm.
tool. It's an idol, right?
Yep.
But, what so with having said all of that though, what has been helpful for you in your journey of kinda processing, uncovering this stuff and being able to get to a point of health with it? What have been some of the helpful rhythms
Yeah.
and disciplines for you?
Contemplation is something that's, uh, I wouldn't say comes naturally to me, but it's kind of how I'm wired. It's in my wheelhouse,
Yeah,
and so that's
talk to me
been.
about that because 'cause I'm having a lot of conversations with people lately who are wanting to, like, engage in that and will try it once or twice, and they sorta, like, flame out. Like, talk to me a little bit about what the
Yeah,
contemplative journeys look like for you.
I'm kinda reticent to do that because I feel like I found
Yeah.
something that works for me, and I hate to prescribe it because I don't have,
Okay.
enough of a wealth of knowledge to say, "Here are the different track," and I'll tell you what I do,
Yeah.
but I don't wanna prescribe this as, like, this is the one size fits all
Sure.
solution. I can tell you what works for me, and I've kind of honed it to, I want it to be based, obviously, I'm a Christian, and I'm connected to Scripture, and those are things that are, like, central to me, and so the practice for me will often look like I'm gonna read a psalm, I'm gonna have a New Testament text I want to read. I'm gonna have I like to use a prayer rope.
Yeah.
It's just like prayer beads, but it's just like a simple cord
I
that
just
has like
started
some
on one
knots.
of those.
Yeah, and I don't
Yeah.
like per se like know exactly how you're supposed to use it. I know for me, like I have it and it's connected to the Lord's Prayer is part of what I do as well. And so it's a lot of music, like instrumental music that kind of fits the mood. Like all those things like are part of like this practice that I do where it starts in scripture, leads to meditation, it goes to another text, more meditation, Lord's Prayer. Like that's kind of how it works for one part of contemplation for me. You and I have talked about this off mic before, but I have this practice. I have a garage gym. I work out
Yeah.
in my garage. That's an important. I would say it's spiritual practice, but is a practice that is spiritually important to me. And at the end of my workout, I will put on like I have a playlist of handful of different songs I'll pick from, and I'll spend 5 minutes on a yoga mat, just kind of in a time of being still and silent. Like there's obviously part of something with exercise that your body releases endorphins. And so there's always like this rush after you work out anyway.
Right.
And so trying to channel that and kind of direct it, and it's time to just listen. And so I'm not like reading scripture, I'm not working prayer beads at that time, but it's an intentional, 4 to 5 minute block of I'm going to be silent. I'm going to kind of listen. I'm going to be, not just listening to my body, but I'm going to listen to, I feel like God is in that. So that's what contemplation looks like for me at this present time.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me how this thing, like, you are not whether it's about comparison or the more I am what I have, I am what I do. I know we've kind of hung out in comparison, but um you're not just trying to like, okay, don't compare myself to others. You're not like try
Yeah,
really
yeah.
hard to not define myself by what I do. Like you're not just doing sort of like that base level behavior modification. It's like this
Mhm.
other thing that seemingly has nothing to do with it over time has these sort of like larger implications underneath the surface. Would that be a fair assessment?
Oh, that's 100% right, and that's why I like to use the language of the prop, is that a prop's there, prop's easy to look, it's naturally what your eyes are gonna be drawn to, but it's never been about that. And it's in the same way like the story about Jonah.
Okay.
Jonah gets swallowed by the whale. It becomes a great kid story about a guy who gets eaten by a whale, spit on land. It's a great illustration of the old precept that you can't keep a good man down. He threw him out anyway.
Well done.
But the whale is simply a prop in the story. Like the real thing that consumed Jonah's heart that had the most monstrous effect on him was his hatred for the Ninevites.
Okay.
And so the prop is the whale. The real pull is hatred of his heart. And the point of the story is that his heart and God's heart aren't aligned. And so
Hmm.
the way that the light gets in Jonah's story is that God says, here's the invitation. You can restructure your heart and let it be in line with my heart, or you can keep it as it is. But the light is going to get in by you dealing with the actual point of this. And it's not about the whale, it's really about the hatred in your heart. Now, obviously, Jonah refuses that invitation, but it's not what you see, it's always what's underneath the surface. That's really what a monster is about.
Yeah. So in sort of the P's that you're using here, well done, preacher man, on that, by the way. That's
PPPL, like the last one doesn't work.
yeah,
Prop,
that's
pull,
true.
point, and then you have the light gets in.
You gotta work on that. Rick Warren would have fired you by now.
Uh, for many things,
For
I'm
a
sure.
lot of things, but for your
Mm.
lack of alliteration would have definitely
And
been torn.
Hawaiian shirts. No
Yeah,
Hawaiian shirts.
he's moved on. But
I haven't.
yeah. So the prop then in my life is the thing that I can see that is happening in front of me that it's like, oh, it's the reaction that I have to something my kids do. It's
Yeah.
the like way that I'm anxious or at the red light, the way that I'm handling that, or even like the I've gone a couple of times to the grocery store and been like even a bit overwhelmed of anxiety as I get in there right now in the midst of all the COVID sort of stuff and like
Yeah.
the shelves being empty and like what is going on here. Would
Yep.
you say like those sort of moments without even like before I even recognize like, oh, that's this anxiousness that's there and where's that coming from? But just kind of that moment, that's sort of the prop. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. What I would say is that what we found in this COVID time, and I don't want to like diagnose you, but let me speak in more
No, diagnose
generalities.
me, please, actually.
Well, what sometimes what we experience in this COVID world, which obviously my wife is a NICU nurse. It's heartbreaking that there are people who are dying from this, and for them, it is not a prop. It is a life and death reality. And my wife's a NICU nurse, and there's babies that are born with COVID, and moms who are on ventilators, and obviously technology is helping, and they're learning things every day, and even as simple as like turning patients over like on their stomach from instead of like being on their back, like that's helping. So great for those people dealing with a very real medical issue, none of which I am referring to in the following words I'm about to say.
W
But
well done.
you like the strong
Well,
caveat
I
there.
like the strong caveat of, like, yeah, I actually care about people and
Yeah,
stuff
no,
is
like
happening and I recognize that. Alright,
yeah, it's a real deal.
yeah,
And I think in my wife's hospital, they're saying that of the people who are like taken in, one out of like 86 people don't make it. And so that's a really big deal. Obviously, that's a small sample size of people who actually go to the hospital and have to
sure.
like, okay, but not those people. Not those people. For some of us, what COVID is doing is making us deal with what's underneath the surface. And food can be a prop. The stats
Okay.
or the way media talks about this on all sides can somehow be like this monster of of control, and underneath this is maybe not so much control, but like mortality. And underneath the surface, like we are not as invincible as we want ourselves to
Mhm.
believe. You know how like when Kobe Bryant died, there are a lot of people felt like, oh my goodness, this feels surreal. Like Kobe Bryant isn't dead because we've gotten so used to an altered reality in which people live forever, that
Yeah.
people are invincible. A young, attractive, rich, athletic man is invincible in our culture. But what seems surreal is actually the truth. The truth is that we're dust, and from dust we shall return. From dust we came, and to dust we shall return. We are a mist that's here today, gone tomorrow. And so, what like I think COVID in terms of like TM, like the kind of like the big power and principality that we're experiencing can be like this monster that says you are not invincible, you are mortal, you're not going to last forever. But I think God is in that and says, yes, you don't last forever, but I, I can be in this and I can bring light to you and remind you that that speaks to what your temporary status should do in terms of creating gratitude and the way that you should embrace the life, the years that you do have. Because I think the real issue is invincibility and our own mortality. And we don't want to deal with those things.
Yeah. Well, it feels like to me one of the things that you're getting at in your book is and maybe I'm a little bit off on this and maybe I'm reading into it a little bit, but I feel like in some of the church culture that I have been a part of and exposed to, which our church cultures are a bit related, but there's definitely been significant differences in them. I think in the church culture that I've been around and experienced in, the as you talk about these monsters, my experience has been the church essentially propagating a theology and a strategy of running from them. And
Yeah.
so the
Yep.
things like, hey, choose faith over fear,
Hmm.
it to me sounds like, um, out of a well-intentioned, like, idea, but to me starts sounding like, don't acknowledge what your fear is and don't sort of push into that further.
Yep.
Instead, kinda cast that aside, and people of faith don't have any kind of fear, so you run away from that.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Well, that's often very true for many people's experience. I've got a friend of mine who is an oncologist, and so I'll probably never see her professionally, partly because she's a OBGYN oncologist. But she tells me that nothing, nothing on that joke.
I
That
was trying to
hurts.
let you keep going. I was
No,
trying to let you tell your
I
story.
wanted a joke for that.
Okay.
She's used that joke in interviews in church before. And I was like, that's pretty good. I want to use it. It worked better for her, but whatever. She's also an oncologist, so she's smarter than me. But she's told me that sometimes dealing with patients who come from a Christian religious background, that they can be the most adamant about not actually dealing with the real grief in front of them. That
Hmm.
faith becomes like this block for them having to deal with reality because they have this, I'm gonna have faith over fear, and science is the final, answer for me, and God is a great physician, so God is gonna heal me, and that sort of stuff, which I I do think miraculous healings happen. I don't think that that doesn't take place, but I also think the mortality rate for every person is 100%, and we are not going to live forever. And faith can be this sort of nice, numbing thing if we use it incorrectly.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking as you were describing that, I was thinking of a practice that my spiritual director was taking me through, of a sort of like, welcoming prayer. And
Mm,
essentially, like
I
one
like
of the
that.
things that's been true in my life for a long time has been a real like, I'm an Enneagram 3. And so along with that, I've got like lack of empathy and lack of like being able to even like identify my emotions well. And so that's worked really good in the church culture. That's
Yeah.
served me really well in all of that. And one of the things that she said to me early on in our meeting was she said, Mike, you're experiencing anxiety. And one of my experiences with anxiety has been when it's not sort of a clinical diagnosable anxiety, is that there's often unresolved grief that's sitting beneath the surface that's
Wow.
creating anxiousness. And you have been like running from that. You've been sort of pushing that under the rug. You haven't been dealing with that, and I want you to welcome that. And when you welcome it, you're not necessarily saying this is good. You're just saying this is true, and you're acknowledging it and you're moving towards it to be able to figure out what to do with it.
Hmm.
Um, That was not a part of any of my sort of Christian experience of my first, I don't know, 30 plus years.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. And you're probably rewarded for not doing that
you're
because
100% rewarded for not doing that.
you know you're a great example of faith, and oh wow, they have a smile on their face even though they're going through adversity. And it, in some ways, as a pastor, you are a pillar that props up like this tent of faith. And so for you to be able to perform as a good pillar, everyone rewards you because you are serving an important role in their life, and they need you to be that. They don't need you to be healthy, they need you to be good.
Oh, that's really good.
Well, I think that idea of it, grief underneath it is that it's not always good, but it's true. Like that's a different kind of function that I think a pastor can bring to the church. Is it's not always good news that we have for you, but it's true.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Luke, I'm really excited for this book. I want people to get it. I want people to stop running from this stuff and to move towards it and to find the light in the midst of it, to start seeing what's the thing behind the thing, like
mhm,
not just what's my reaction, but what's underneath it. I think that there's a richer experience of faith for us on the other side. And so I'm
yeah.
really grateful that you've put this together and I'm excited for people to get it.
Well, thank you for your kind words.
Yeah. So
You're a
again,
very wise man.
give us the title of the book. Tell us
I
where
almost
all
said God over good. That is not the title of the
God
book.
Over
That is
Good is
the other
good
book.
also.
Befriending Your Monsters, and you can get it everywhere. There's audiobook on Audible. Yeah, it's on the internet. Grab you a copy. It's all
Uh,
over the place.
and I heard that you're not reading the audiobook. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah,
I
that's
want to
really
run from that.
disappointing to me.
Yeah,
Can we
so
make a
like
bootleg?
that's a great we should. It's a great option if you've ever thought, man, Luke has some good insight, but his voice is so dang annoying. I can't ever get it. So Audible has solved that problem.
I'm gonna email that guy that left you a podcast review and tell him this this
Who's
is what we
that?
need to get.
That's what he wants.
That's
That's
what
what
he
he wants.
wants. He
Now
wants the nuggets of Luke without the whole of Luke.
yeah, that's it. That's very awkward phrasing. Let's not meander in that one too long. Uh, but can you imagine someone having I haven't heard it yet, but, like, someone having to perform my sense of humor? Because you
I'm
have to like, you're reading, like, my terrible jokes in there, and they're dry and sarcastic, and yeah,
I wanna buy the audiobook just for that, I wanna figure out where your jokes are and just fast forward it to those points and listen to just that part.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a song lyric, like, within, like, the first page of the book that is he gonna sing the song? Is he gonna say it? I don't know.
And is it a guy reading it?
Yeah, I think his name is
Okay.
Axel. I believe
Axel.
I'm hoping his last name is Rose, which would make it awesome,
It would be
but I don't think it's Axl Rose.
Luke, thanks for hanging out today. Befriending Your Monsters, everybody, you should check it out.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.